Hello everybody, this is Gustavo, exam coach. Welcome to a new video. We started this series of videos with a lesson about clauses and sentences in written English. Today, we'll try to help you put these concepts, this theory, to the test. We'll see today a set of practice questions about clauses and sentences in written English. All right, so let's begin. We'll start with a series of exercises to identify the type of sentence according to the classification we saw yesterday. That is, whether a sentence is a simple sentence, a compound sentence, or a complex sentence. And these exercises will have to classify each sentence and note down whether it is simple, compound, or complex, just writing the word next to it. Okay, so we have this set of 6 sentences. In this moment, I recommend you to pause the video and try to solve this exercise on your own. We'll resume shortly to see the answer to each of these questions. All right, let's see the answer to each of the sentences. Number 1. A rainbow may be visible when water drops refract light rays. We can see that there is a subject clearly, and this subject is a rainbow. We see a conjugated verb attached to it, which is may be, and so we know that there is a clause here, most likely an independent clause. Later on, we see when water drops refract light rays. Now, take a look at this. There is, in this sentence, another subject, which is water, and another conjugated verb attached to this subject, drops. And we see immediately prior to water, the word when. So you can see that this word actually belongs in the list of subordinators we saw yesterday. Thus, the expression when water drops refract light rays becomes a subordinate clause, and this rainbow may be visible. That is our independent clause. So this is our independent clause, and the other, right, this is a subordinate clause. So clearly, this association between an independent clause and a subordinate clause is called a complex sentence. So number 1 is complex. About number 2. My history professor requires everyone to lead a class discussion. Okay, here we can notice a subject, my history professor. We can also notice a conjugated verb, requires. And then there are some words that complete the idea. So clearly there is just a single clause and an independent clause that is a simple sentence. Number 3, hamburgers are the most popular fast food, yet some people never eat them. There is a subject here, a verb, so we have like an independent clause. Then we have another subject, some people, and say never eat, another conjugated verb. So we have another independent clause. But then between them, between these two independent clauses, we see the word yet. And the word yet is actually a conjunction. A conjunction connects two independent clauses in order to make a compound sentence. So we have number 3, a compound sentence. Okay, this is called a coordinating conjunction. And this word actually belongs in the same family as but, and, yeah, remember, and, but, or, we have also yet. And there are some other words such as so, and then we have also for and nor. Now notice that the initial letters form an acronym which we call fanboys, an easy way to remember all 7 coordinating conjunctions in English. Let's keep moving on. Number 4. Money plays a large part in war because it pays for the necessary weapons and soldiers. Okay, notice here is a money, the subject, plays, the conjugated verb. Is there any other subject here? Yeah, you can see it, subject, pays, another conjugated verb, and that's it. We have 2 clauses, but we have here 1 independent clause, and here we have 1 subordinate clause we can see the word because just before the subject it. It is a subordinator, right? So because of this, we can see this is the clause association that we call a complex sentence. One more time. All right, let's keep going. Number 5. As electronic technology developed, the transistor gave way to the integrated circuit. All right, so we can see one initial clause as electronic technology developed. Notice subject, conjugated verb, and this special word, which is a subordinator. And we have another main clause, subject, conjugated verb. So we have another independent clause and a subordinate clause, which means we have another complex sentence. Finally, we have number 6. Gabriel Fahrenheit invented the first mercury thermometer, and the Fahrenheit temperature scale bears his name. So we see that there is Gabriel Fahrenheit as a subject of a first independent clause, conjugated verb, invented. And so we can notice this is one clause, one independent clause with a full thought by itself. We have another one. Here, the Fahrenheit temperature scale bears his name. What's the subject here? The Fahrenheit temperature scale. All of it is the subject of our second independent clause, bears the conjugated verb. And we notice that the two independent clauses are being connected together by and, which is a coordinating conjunction, one of the words above. Yeah, these are coordinating conjunctions. We'll be seeing this in depth in a future lesson where we'll discuss conjunctions, all their varieties in full length. So that's it. This is the first part of this practice set of questions. Let's continue with a second one. All right, so we just missed labeling our last and 6th sentence. That means we have a compound sentence. Remember, in compound sentences, you can connect independent clauses, but when you have the presence of at least one subordinate clause in a sentence, then the sentence is called a complex sentence. Well then, let's see another set of questions for subordinate clauses. It says, underline the subordinate clauses in the sentences below. Circle the subordinator that introduces each subordinate clause. Okay, you have 8 sentences here. You need to underline all subordinate clauses you may find and identify the subordinator, which is the initial word in a subordinate clause, the word or set of words, in some cases, that is immediately before the subject of the clause, of the subordinate clause. At this point, you may pause the video so that you have time to look at each of the sentences and try to solve this exercise. All right? In a moment, we'll resume the exercise and we'll explain how we can identify what they're asking. So good luck trying to solve this set of exercises now. Very well. Let's keep going. Let's go over number 1. Sunglasses are absolutely essential for snow travel because they filter light. Yeah, we see there is, of course, an independent clause. Sunglasses are essential, blah, blah, blah. But then you see another clause, because they filter light. Yes, this is a subordinate clause, because they filter light. And because is the subordinator. Let's go over number 2. Whenever you use oil paints, you need turpentine to clean your brushes. All right, there is an independent clause in this sentence, which is you need turpentine, etc. But there is a subordinate clause before that independent clause. We can notice the expression, whenever you use oil paints. Well, this subordinate clause is like an adverb here, right? It's working with an adverbial function, providing information about the time for the action described in the main or independent clause. whenever is the subordinator. Please notice that in each of these sentences, if we kind of isolated each of the subordinate clauses and we took away the subordinators, we would be left with just an independent clause. For example, if you take away the word because, you just get with they filter light in the first sentence. In the second, if you remove whenever from the subordinate clause, you just get you use oil paints. And those look and feel like independent clauses. In fact, let's keep going with number 3. It is important that each hiker carry extra food and clothing, even if only a day hike is planned. Okay, we can see there is an independent clause at the beginning of this sentence. It is important. Yeah, we have that independent or main clause. But then we can notice that following important, there is another clause beginning with the word that each hiker carry extra food and clothing. Take a look. We can see here the subject, each hiker, conjugated verb, carry, and there is the subordinator, that, which actually indicates that this underlying clause, this subordinate clause, is the true subject of the independent clause. This, that each hiker carry extra food and clothing, is actually the it being mentioned at the beginning of the sentence. So it here is kind of a false subject, right? The true subject of our sentence is that, or the fact that each hiker carry extra food and clothing. That is important, yes. So we have a noun clause here. What about another subordinate clause? We can notice after the comma following clothing, we see even if only a day hike is planned. You can notice that a day hike is a subject, is planned is the conjugated verb, and there is this expression even if. And this subordinator sets up a condition for what is being mentioned before. Yes, so it's working as an adverbial modifier. How about number 4? Take a look. People who speak to animals believe that the animal understands what is being said. All right, we have an independent clause, of course, but then following the subject in this independent clause, which is people, we instantly see another clause following people, attached to people, who speak to animals. Yes, who speak to animals is an adjective clause with a subordinator who, and this is modifying people. It is describing or stating one attribute of the subject people. Okay, we see that there is the conjugated verb for the subject in our independent clause, that is believe, and then after believe there is another clause, that the animal understands what is being said. Yes, all this actually stands for another subordinate clause, that the animal understands what is being said. All of it is a clause with the subject, the animal, and conjugated verb understands, and the subordinator that, which actually being attached to the verb believe becomes the direct object for the verb believe. So we have this clause underlined in green as a noun clause standing for the function of the direct object of the verb believe. But you can see that embedded in this clause, in this subordinate clause, starting with that, there is another one, which is in fact the clause beginning with the subordinator what. Here, what is being said. You can see that what is a subordinator and also at the same time the subject of this clause, and is being said is the conjugated verb, right? So this clause, what is being said, is another subordinate clause embedded in the clause underlined in green and actually acting as another noun clause that is the direct object of the verb understand, in a similar fashion to what happens with the clause starting with that, is the direct object for the verb believe. right? And the clause who speak to animals is actually a sort of adjective for people, right? The subject in the independent clause. So we can notice there are actually three subordinate clauses in sentence 4. Let's keep moving to sentence 5. Because its young are vulnerable, the black rosy finch builds its nest in a rocky crevice so that predators cannot reach it. Very long sentence indeed. Okay, we have here one subordinate clause, because its young are vulnerable. Yeah, we can see its young is the subject, are is the conjugated verb, because is the subordinator. Then we have an independent clause, the black rosy finch builds. Yes, that is the independent clause. And then it continues to say in a rocky crevice, so that, and then so that signals the beginning of another independent clause. Take a look. So that predators cannot reach it. Here we have another subject, another conjugated verb, and so that establishing a sort of consequence for the information in the independent clause. Well, let's keep moving to number 6. Deltas are formed when tidal currents are unable to disperse all of the sediment that reaches the river mouth. Okay, so deltas are formed is essentially our independent clause or main clause, right? Subject and conjugated verb. And then we have one subordinate clause, subordinate adverbial clause, when tidal currents are unable to disperse all of the sediment that reaches the river mouth. All of it is actually a subordinate adverb clause, stating somehow when the action of the deltas being formed takes place. So within our subordinate clause with when as a subordinator, we have another dependent or subordinate clause. Take a look at the word sediment. The word sediment is followed by another clause starting with that. That reaches the river mouth. So we have a subject here, which is that itself, reaches the conjugated verb, then the other words that complete the idea. That reaches the river mouth, and that is also the subordinator at the same time. And that reaches the river mouth is actually describing some kind of attribute or characteristic of what? Of the sediment that precedes it. All right? So it's like an adjective for sediment. And sediment is part of the direct object of the verb disperse, which is part, right, of the subordinate clause starting at when. So you can see one example of a subordinate clause embedded in another subordinate clause. Let's move on to number 7. After a spill has occurred, many animals swallow oil when they try to clean themselves, which can poison them. Okay, the first one is visible, is noticeable because of the word after. A spill has occurred. Okay, so that's a clause. After signals it is a subordinate clause. Then we have the independent clause. Many animals swallow oil. But then immediately after swallow oil, there is another adverb clause starting with when they try to clean themselves. We see they try, subject and verb, and when is a subordinator, because this clause is actually describing the time for the action of swallowing. And after themselves, we see the expression which can poison them. Actually, this is pretty much describing an attribute of this oil that was swallowed by many animals, right? It is working as an adjective for oil. And the whole thing, we can underline it with another color, which can poison them. We can see which is the subordinator, at the same time is subject, and then can poison, right? This can poison is the conjugated verb. So all of it is working as a sort of adjective for oil, right? Oil is being modified by that clause. So we have these three subordinate clauses here. What about number 8? Let's try another approach to analyze this sentence. We'll read the whole sentence first, but then we'll go immediately to the end of the sentence. Take a look. Economists believe that investment takes place when investors decide that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. Okay, let's spot the last part of this long sentence. It says, if it sacrifices consumption today. Is this a subordinate clause? Yes, it is, because it has a subject, it, the conjugated verb sacrifices, and then we have if before it. This is a subordinator. So this is being kind of a condition for another action mentioned earlier. And what is that? That action is that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow. Yes, the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. So we understand now that this if is working as an adverbial modifier for will have. Yes, a condition for that action of will have more consumption. Yeah, the economy would have more consumption if it sacrifices consumption today. Okay, so, but you can see that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today could stand alone as a complete sentence because it is a complete idea on its own. But the fact that we are preceding the economy as a subject of the clause with this word that makes the whole clause subordinate, that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. That is a whole subordinate clause starting with that, and notice the position of that. That is immediately following the verb decide, the conjugated verb. And so that and the rest of the clause, the economy, etc., is actually the direct object of the verb decide. So it's a noun clause. But now we see that decide all of that, decide what follows, is actually part of another clause because it has a subject investors. Investors decide that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. Okay, investors decide and the rest could stand alone as a complete sentence, as an independent clause actually. But the fact that there is the word when before investors, that makes investors decide and the rest a subordinate clause itself. So let's try underlining this in another color. Take a look. When investors decide that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. Yeah, all of it is another subordinate clause starting with when, which indicates an adverbial clause. And this adverbial clause is modifying the verb immediately before when, which is takes place. When does something take place? When investors decide and yada, yada. So this is modifying as an adverbial modifier to the word or the verb phrase takes place. So we see it's an adverbial clause. But takes place is a conjugated verb for another subject, which is investment. Investment takes place when investors decide, blah, blah, blah. This part of the sentence, investment takes place, yada, yada, could stand alone as a complete sentence too. But it is not a complete sentence because it is preceded by the word that. And therefore, this group of words, starting with that investment, make another subordinate clause. Take a look. That investment takes place when investors decide that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. All of it is a subordinate clause. Why? Because of that. Because of the word that. This word subordinates the whole clause to something earlier. And what is earlier? And what is before that? Actually, the verb believe. So this that clause is actually performing as another direct object for the conjugated verb believe, which is actually the verb for the subject economists in the independent clause of this sentence. So now you can see, people, we have in total, how many colors can you distinguish here in the underlining of this sentence? Okay, we have green, we have red, we have light blue, then we have purple. In total, there are 4 subordinate clauses in this complex sentence, and each of these subordinate clauses is well embedded within another one. So this is very interesting, and it's probably an ultimate example of what complex sentences can look like. All right, let's take a look at this amazing sentence one more time. Economists believe that investment takes place when investors decide that the economy will have more consumption tomorrow if it sacrifices consumption today. Okay, so that's it. We have finished this part, and we'll move on to another set of questions. Now we have some sentence completion exercises in which you will have to choose the word or phrase that best completes the sentence, considering that there are 4 alternatives in each of the sentences. Pay attention to the words just before and after the blank space, as well as to all the punctuation symbols, such as commas or semicolons or colons, because their position will also help you distinguish the most appropriate options to choose. Let's just go back for a moment, right, before you proceed to do this exercise, and take a look at this list of coordinating conjunctions. A little review here. When do we use coordinating conjunctions? We use coordinating conjunctions to connect clauses. Of course, we can use these words to connect words or phrases, but we can also use these to connect independent clauses and thus have a compound sentence. But be careful. In every sentence, we've seen the use of coordinating conjunctions. We can see that there is a comma before the coordinating conjunction. A comma must be placed before for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so when they are used to connect independent clauses. For example, pay attention to here, the comma before yet. There is also comma before and. All right, pay attention to that. You cannot use a coordinating conjunction unless you place a comma just prior to it. Okay, now let's proceed to sentence completion exercises. At this point, you can pause the video so that you have enough time to solve these first 4 questions. Very well then. Let's see the answers to these 4 questions. The first one says, banknotes are only paper, comma, and we have among these options, but they represent value is the correct one. Yes, this one, B. Why? Because you have an independent clause. Banknotes are only paper, then a comma. So you have to continue the idea with another independent clause. But independent clauses can only be connected using coordinating conjunctions such as but. You cannot put 2 independent clauses together just with a comma in between. All right? You need a coordinating conjunction to connect 2 independent clauses. But what about if we have just 2 independent clauses and a semicolon? Can a semicolon, this symbol, do the job? Yes. A semicolon can be used to connect independent clauses and thus form a compound sentence. Question 2. During the Jurassic period, comma, and we say something here, the dominant animals on land. So let's try one at a time. During the Jurassic period, comma, dinosaurs, the dominant animals on land, there's no subject. No clause at all, because there's no subject and conjugated verb. If we say dinosaurs, the dominant animals, because, okay, they could be the subject, but what about the action verb? No action verb. What about option B? While dinosaurs, the dominant animals on land. We have a subordinator, we have dinosaurs, which could be a subject, but what about the conjugated verb? We have no conjugated verb, so there's a problem here. No conjugated verb, we have no clause. And without clause, we don't have any sentence, any correct sentence. So during the Jurassic period, dinosaurs were the dominant animals on land. Yes, this is good. This is the best option. What about the other one, the 4th one? During the Jurassic period, when dinosaurs were the dominant animals on land, okay, we have a subordinate clause, but a subordinate clause needs an independent clause. Where would that independent clause be? There wouldn't be any independent clause, so D is not correct, okay? C is the best option. Number 3, yada yada, the ability of birds to move through the air using wings and feathers. Okay, what about the ability of birds to move through the air using wings and feathers? Sounds like a noun phrase only. So, possibility is that we can equate this noun phrase to some other subject using the conjugated verb to be. So, option D seems more natural. Flight is the ability of birds to move, blah, blah, blah. All right, so the correct answer choice is flight is. Option D. Option C is as a flight, the ability of birds, there is no conjugated verb there. So it is not even a clause. It is flight, the ability of birds to move through the air using wings and feathers. It is flight, the ability of birds. Now, flight is the ability of birds, not it is flight. And flight, the ability of birds, absolutely no conjugated verb. Let's try number 4. Dams are costly, but once they have been built, yada yada, electricity very cheaply. Okay, dams are costly is one independent clause. Then we see comma and but. So we understand that here we have a coordinating conjunction. So we have one independent clause, and what follows another set of words that could stand for an independent clause. We need an independent clause now in order to have a complete idea that can be connected using but with the first complete idea. So once they have been built, it's a subordinate clause, electricity very cheaply. All right, we need a subject and a conjugated verb. So they produce, it would be the best option. Subject and conjugated verb. Dams are costly, but once they have been built, that is dams, dams, produce electricity very cheaply. So it is the best answer choice. Option B. We have some more here. 6 more, and to finish this set of exercises and our whole session. Okay, please, you can pause the video here so you can try to answer these questions on your own first. Very well. Let's keep moving. Number 5. Blank, the commercial sewing machine was introduced. Thousands of women found jobs in the textile industry. Thousands of women found jobs in the textile industry sounds like an independent clause, right? We have thousands of women, the subject, conjugated verb. So what comes before must be some kind of phrase or a subordinate clause. That's the only possibility, because all that separates these two groups of words is just the comma before thousands. So what we need before the comma is a subordinate clause. Take a look. When the commercial sewing machine was introduced, yeah, we have a perfect match because it is an adverbial clause that would modify or describe somehow the time frame for the action of found mentioned in the independent clause. So this is our best choice, when. Later, the commercial sewing machine would make the first part of this sentence just an independent clause. And remember, independent clauses cannot be connected using just a comma. That's why later cannot be the initial word. Then is another subordinator, but doesn't make sense, right? We don't use in this way. How doesn't make sense either as a subordinator, because how is a noun clause subordinator. What about number 6? It says, yada yada, many types of building stone, from tough granite to soft sandstone. All right, we have the many types of building stone, and then another phrase, there wouldn't be any subject and conjugated verb. Because many types, that is no clause at all. There are many types, yes, this is a special kind of clause with a full subject there, and the conjugated verb are, right? There are many types of building stone, from tough granite to soft sandstone. Best choice. Number 7. Fixed bridges do not have moving parts, comma, yada yada, either lift or swing open. Notice that the first part of this sentence, before the comma, just until the comma, fixed bridges do not have moving parts, is an independent clause on its own. All of this. So after the comma, you could only have a subordinate clause or another independent clause, but preceded with a coordinating conjunction. But we don't see any coordinating conjunction at the beginning of the answer choices. So we assume that it couldn't be a compound sentence. It has to be a complex sentence, and we need to look for a subordinator that makes more sense, completing the idea of this independent clause. So movable bridges. If we say movable bridges either lift or swing, we would have just an independent clause. Do movable bridges either lift or swing? Same thing. Movable bridges are either lift or swing open. Doesn't make sense because lift or swing open are conjugated verbs. We don't need another verb here. But the last option, the last answer choice, is the correct one. Fixed bridges do not have moving parts, while movable bridges either lift or swing open, whilst creating a contrast between the previous clause, the independent clause, and the subordinate clause. Number 8, blank. In 1980, Pierre Trudeau proposed a new constitution for Canada. Okay, let's try one at a time. His return to power in 1980. Okay, that's a phrase, but we cannot have a phrase just before the subject Pierre Trudeau. It wouldn't make any sense. Option B says, after he had returned to power. Okay, we have a subordinate clause with after, which is actually providing like a time frame. It's an adverbial modifier for the conjugated verb in the independent clause. Pierre Trudeau proposed a new constitution. When did he propose? After he had returned to power. This is the best answer choice. Number 9. In any environment, blah, 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 a limit to the resources that are available for any particular species. Okay, we need a conjugated verb because it says a limit to the resources that are available. These that are available is just clause modifying the word resources, an adjective clause. But then we have a limit to the resources as a phrase, and there's no subject and conjugated verb. But if we add or plug in there is, okay, there is a false subject, which means the true subject is a limit to the resources, is or exists in any environment. This is something like this. The meaning of there is a limit to the resources here, all of it till the end of the sentence. That is, the true subject exists or is in any environment. That would be the true meaning of the sentence, right? So there is our best answer choice. Finally, we have number 10. The harvest moon, the full moon nearest the autumn equinox, comma. So we know that it looks like this comma delimits the phrase, the full moon, which modifies the harvest moon, right? So the harvest moon must be the subject probably. But it says blank, a period of several days when the moon rises soon after sunset. When the moon rises is a subordinate clause. We still need a conjugated verb for the subject of our independent clause. The harvest moon is the subject of that independent clause. So the harvest moon, it wouldn't be correct because we would have a repeated subject here. The harvest moon, which brings a period, okay, which brings would become, with the rest of the sentence, an adjective clause for harvest moon. But what is the conjugated verb? What is the action that describes what this harvest moon is or is doing? And brings would mean that before and there is a complete independent clause, but there is not. The harvest moon, the full moon nearest the autumn equinox, is not a clause even. So this leaves us with option D. Brings. The harvest moon brings a period, and thus the harvest moon brings is our independent clause embedded in which there is this other subordinate clause when the moon rises, right? So this is the best answer choice. So this is just a way in which we can see how the theory of clauses, subordinate clauses, independent clauses, and sentences, simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences work when we analyze sentences in written English. Okay, perhaps you would desire more elaboration on the concepts of subordinators, their functions, their varieties, as well as the way conjunctions work and the syntax for the correct use of conjunctions and other linking expressions for clauses in order to make compound or complex sentences. We'll be seeing all of this content and much more in our coming lesson, which will be entirely about conjunctions. Okay, in this new lesson, we will explore different kinds of conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions, the ones we use to assemble independent clauses into compound sentences. We'll be seeing also subordinating conjunctions or subordinators, the words that mark the beginning of a subordinate clause. We will also be dealing with correlative conjunctions, which are paired expressions that also work as coordinating conjunctions. And finally, we'll be dealing with conjunctive adverbs, special words and expressions that can also help connect independent clauses into compound sentences. Don't miss this new lesson coming soon on my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.